During my mother's funeral, a tense atmosphere evolved when my mother-in-law arrived wearing a smile. She casually mentioned that my home would now belong to her son. As she explored the rooms, considering which one she might claim, she hinted at taking over one, saying, "I wonder if this room would be suitable for me." I politely corrected her, explaining that I was the one inheriting the house. Unperturbed, she argued that since I was married to her son, essentially, everything I owned also belonged to him. "So, in a way, this house is my son's, right?" she said with a grin. Her insensitivity to my mourning was stark, as she cheerfully suggested we start getting along better, implying a move-in was imminent. My frustration grew as she seemed oblivious to my grief. "Why bring this up now? Can't you see this isn't the time?" I thought to myself. This house, filled with cherished memories of my parents, felt threatened by her unreasonable claim. Amid these challenges, I recalled my journey. I'm a 44-year-old who had almost given up on marriage after turning 41. But life took a surprising turn when I met Brian, my now husband, who is 5 years my junior. We connected through a mutual acquaintance, and he always respects my views, including our discussions on where to spend our honeymoon. Although he initially suggested Europe, he happily agreed to my preference for the Maldives when I brought it up. However, complications arose when my husband mentioned his mother's desire to live with us due to his father's declining health. Despite understanding her difficulties, we had agreed before marriage that we wouldn't live together. I reminded him of this, and he promised to discuss it with his mother. Throughout these interactions, it became clear that I needed to stand firm to protect my family home from becoming just another asset claimed by my mother-in-law. My husband, recognizing my concerns, agreed to support me in ensuring our home remained a sanctuary, untouched by unwanted intrusions. Meeting a wonderful person always brings joy, yet there's a pang of regret that haunts me. My father passed away 4 years before I got married. He never saw my wedding, nor could I reassure him about my future. My father was a disciplined executive at a small to medium-sized enterprise. I admired him deeply for his dedication and ability to provide for our family comfortably despite the modest scale of the business. This respect only deepened as I began my career as an office employee, understanding firsthand the challenges of the workplace. 3 years into my marriage, my mother also passed away. During these difficult times, my husband was incredibly supportive. "Are you okay? Maybe you should rest a bit," he'd suggest, always looking out for me during the funeral, which we held at our family home. Unlike many modern funerals, which are held in facilities, we had ours at home, maintaining a personal touch. At my mother's funeral, I was comforted by my husband's presence, grateful for his understanding and care. However, the mood shifted when my mother-in-law, Sandra, arrived. She expressed her condolences, which I acknowledged with thanks. Our relationship had been cordial but distant, as we hadn't lived together and only interacted occasionally. During the funeral, Sandra approached me, and her demeanor seemed unusually cheerful, which felt out of place. She thanked me for helping with the funeral, noting how smoothly everything went because of my efforts. Then, quite abruptly, she said, "The funeral is over now, isn't it? Let's drop the formalities." I was initially taken aback, having thought her earlier kindness was genuine. She then began commenting on how splendid the house was. Despite my protests about some areas being untidy, she dismissed my concerns with a wave, saying, "Don't fuss over the details." Then, boldly stepping further into the house, she declared, "My son will inherit this house. I wonder if I should take this room." I hesitated, trying to process her words and intentions, but it was clear that her earlier compassion was merely a facade. Her true intentions, to lay claim to my family home, were now starkly apparent. During a tense conversation at my family home, I reminded my mother-in-law that I was the one inheriting the property. With a smirk, she responded, I know your parents had no other children and a wife's belongings are her husband's, right? So this house essentially belongs to my son, doesn't it? Her comment left me exasperated as I questioned the legitimacy of her claim. With unsettling cheerfulness, she suggested, "From now on, let's get along better," and confidently announced her plan to convert one of the rooms into hers. Alarmed, I asked, "Does this mean we'll be living together?" Without any hesitation, she confirmed, "Exactly. With such a beautiful house, it'd be a shame to leave rooms empty when two people can comfortably live here. Plus, I won't have to take care of my husband all by myself." This conversation occurred shortly after my mother had passed away, and my mother-in-law's insensitivity only fueled my growing frustration. Why would she make such comments during such a sensitive time? Just then, my husband overheard our exchange and intervened. "Mom, what are you saying? This isn't the right time for such discussions," he scolded. Unfazed, she retorted, "Why make such a fuss?" My husband firmly insisted she leave and escorted her out, apologizing to me afterward. "Sorry, my mom can be unreasonable." I appreciated his support, replying, "It's fine, thanks for handling it." However, as we began to move past the funeral and discuss the future of my family home, I noticed a subtle difference in my husband's approach. 12 days after the funeral, we talked about potentially moving out of our cramped apartment. "This apartment is getting too small. Shouldn't we consider moving back to my parents' house?" I suggested. He agreed, "Yeah, you're right. With the possibility of having kids and needing more space, it's better than squeezing into this tiny place." But then he hesitantly added, "Well then, we should start preparing for the move." As we delved into the details of the move, he revealed something unexpected. Considering the spacious house and all the empty rooms, I thought maybe my parents could move in with us. I was stunned and asked, "Are you suggesting we live together?" Recently, I had noticed a change in my husband. Despite previously appearing to prioritize my opinions, I now wondered if he was just agreeing with me without considering the implications, or if he was too influenced by his mother's wishes. His readiness to accommodate her ideas was becoming more evident, challenging my perception of him as a supportive partner. The suggestion from my husband to consider living together made me question his genuine stance on the matter. Despite my clear objections to cohabitation, he seemed to waver, often appearing to side with his mother. "Haven't I made it clear we won't live together?" I reminded him frequently. His usual response was, "But Mom keeps insisting." I brought up how he had stood up to her at the funeral, confronting her about her inappropriate behavior. "You opposed living together then, didn't you?" I challenged. He conceded, "Yes, I was upset about her barging in, but that doesn't mean I'm completely against the idea of living together. I just didn't think such a crucial decision should be made hastily at the funeral." Although he had appeared to agree with my stance initially, it became evident that his inclinations might align more with his mother. Moreover, he seemed to dodge making definitive decisions, perhaps believing that maintaining a stance of neutrality absolved him of choosing sides. It was frustrating. "I'm firmly against living with someone who intruded into my parents' house during the funeral and presumed to claim a room," I asserted. "Please make sure your mother understands this," I insisted. Reluctantly, he replied, "Why are you so bothered by it? Fine, I'll let her know." My perspective on living with my in-laws had shifted dramatically after witnessing my mother-in-law's behavior at my mother's funeral. The idea of sharing the home that my father had built, a place filled with cherished memories with her, was now unthinkable. This was compounded by my husband's lack of firmness. When he did communicate my stance on cohabitation, my mother-in-law directly challenged me, questioning, "Why are you opposing living together in such a spacious house? You're Brian's wife now, and his father and I are practically your parents too. Why such strong opposition?" I reiterated my refusal to cohabitate, mentioning my husband's mobility issues and the challenges I face managing alone. She accused me of abandoning them, to which I reminded her of the practical reasons we had discussed before. Despite feeling sympathy for my father-in-law's health, the possibility of being overwhelmed with responsibilities if we were to live together loomed large. If cohabitation were ever to be considered, a significant improvement in both my husband's and mother-in-law's attitudes toward my needs and boundaries would be non-negotiable. A few days after my mother-in-law called me heartless, I was surprised to see my husband rearranging our living room. Curious, I asked him, "What are you doing? Is this for storing moving boxes?" He replied, "No, I'm planning to make space for 2 beds here." The mention of 2 beds immediately filled me with dread. Cautiously, I inquired, "Are your parents coming to stay?" To my dismay, he said, "No, they're moving in today." The news hit me hard. Despite my clear objections, it seemed my husband and mother-in-law had decided on cohabitation without my consent. "Why is this happening?" I questioned, my frustration growing. He explained, "Their lease is up, so we decided they'd move here instead of renewing it. It'll be cramped with 4 of us, but we're moving soon, right? Just bear with it for a little while." Distressed, I reiterated, "That's not what I meant. Why is cohabitation even on the table? I've said before, I don't want to live with someone who barged into my parents' house on the day of the funeral and suggested living in this room." He promised to talk to his mom, adding, "We'll be living together from now on, so please try to get along." Annoyed, I asked, "Why do you prioritize everything your mom says?" He tried to clarify, "It's not about prioritizing her. I listen to both your opinions and make judgments." However, it was clear that when it came to my mother-in-law, he seemed unable to resist her influence, believing he was making independent decisions. I had always seen him as kind, but alongside my mother-in-law, he became a different person, inadvertently forcing me into this unwanted living situation. As we welcomed my in-laws into our already cramped apartment, my mother-in-law began to complain about the living conditions. I apologized for the sudden addition of 2 more people and assured them we would manage until we could move to a larger space. Although my father-in-law Frank seemed polite and I hoped he wouldn't be a problem, it quickly became apparent he was inclined to follow my mother-in-law's lead, turning into another yes man. Just days later, my mother-in-law asked me to run an errand to buy a medicated patch for her, a small request that nonetheless added to my growing list of frustrations. As my in-laws prepared to move into my parents' home, the situation grew increasingly untenable. Faced with the prospect of living together under one roof, I felt a desperate need to take control and protect my parents' legacy. My mother-in-law was openly excited about the move, looking forward to the space and comfort it would afford. Unbeknownst to her, I had been quietly making preparations of my own, determined to preserve the sanctity of my childhood home. After about 12 quiet days, I made a drastic decision. I had officially renounced my inheritance, securing court approval to relinquish my rights to the property. When I announced this to my family, I explained, "This house holds immense sentimental value for me. I couldn't bear the thought of you living there, so I've decided to let it go, keeping it as a beautiful memory in my heart." My mother-in-law was incredulous, berating me. "What madness possessed you? Even if you didn't want it, you could have sold it for a good sum. Why just abandon it?" I remained calm as I responded, "Selling it would just mean you'd end up relying on that money next. I thought it'd be clearer if I simply had nothing to do with it." She was furious. "We moved out of our previous place for this. What are you doing? How will you make it up to us?" I stood firm, my voice steady. "I've consistently opposed cohabitation. You forced this situation upon us without a proper discussion." So I took a stand. The revelation of my renunciation left my husband and mother-in-law visibly shaken, their faces drained of color, and they were speechless. My father-in-law looked on, bewildered by the unfolding drama. Pushing the conversation further, I addressed my husband. "Brian, I've been thinking about getting a divorce. What do you think?" He stammered, taken aback. A divorce? Before he could further articulate his thoughts, my mother-in-law interjected aggressively, "Brian, you should divorce this ridiculous wife immediately." Her demand for a divorce was harsh but expected, and it served as a critical test to see if my husband could make an independent decision in such a crucial moment. Brian mumbled a response, still struggling to articulate his position. Seeing his hesitation, my resolve hardened. "Fine. Divorce seems to be the only option," I declared. My father-in-law tried to intervene. "Brian, it can't be helped. Your mom is insisting." Brian finally spoke up, albeit reluctantly. "Well, you seem to want a divorce too, and maybe that's for the best." Even in this pivotal moment, it became clear that my husband, along with his father, remained unable to stand up to my mother-in-law's dominant will, always defaulting to her wishes in even the smallest decisions. When my husband suggested divorce, it seemed as if he was trying to portray it as a concession for my benefit. Resigned yet determined, I declared, "Very well, let's proceed with the divorce." I planned to move out with just a few essentials. That night, I stayed in a budget hotel, knowing urgent tasks awaited me. The following day, I took a half day from work and went back to the courthouse to manage these matters. A few days later, my mother-in-law called, clearly agitated. "What's going on? It seems that house is now becoming yours. Why this sudden change?" she demanded, likely having learned of the situation through the estate division process. "Yes, the house is mine," I affirmed. Accusations flew from her side. "You forged documents and deceived us." I responded calmly, "Why would I forge documents meant for court submission? Those are genuine." "Then why is the house becoming yours when you were supposed to renounce the inheritance?" she pressed. I explained, "Well, right after I submitted the renunciation application, I withdrew it. Renouncing an inheritance is indeed difficult once accepted, but it takes about a month for the application to be processed, during which it can be retracted. The documents I showed were from the application stage. I intentionally led you to believe I had relinquished the house and used the threat of divorce to gauge reactions and decide my next steps. I had not expected my mother-in-law's mindset to change, but I had hoped my husband would show some sign of not wanting the divorce. If he had expressed reluctance, I planned to reconsider and later clarify the situation about the house. However, things had progressed differently. "So, the property division will make the house yours then? Since it was acquired before the divorce, it's subject to being split, right? You two are supposed to sell it and split the money, aren't you?" My mother-in-law reasoned, looking to salvage what she could from the situation. However, I had anticipated this. If that house were jointly acquired, it would indeed be considered marital property. But it's an asset I inherited, which is exempt from property division. Specific assets like inherited property aren't eligible for division, I clarified. She persisted. "What about the money that would come to Brian through property division?" I calmly responded, "We've only been married for a few years." This brief marriage duration further complicated her plans, as the shorter the marriage, the less likely the division of individual inherited assets, preserving my rightful claim to the house. After my conversation with my mother-in-law, where she branded me as selfish and heartless, I stood firm in my resolve to protect my family home. "I'm safeguarding this house because it holds precious memories of my parents," I told her. "I don't want people like you living there. If you have any further complaints, please go through a lawyer." Following that heated exchange, the divorce proceedings unfolded more quickly than expected. It seemed my mother-in-law had urged my husband to hasten the process. Regardless of her motivations, the divorce was finalized, liberating me from the ongoing stress of dealing with my in-laws. There was a profound sense of relief, as if I had successfully protected my father's home from potential disruption. After I moved out, my ex-in-law continued to live in the apartment where my ex-husband and I had resided. Despite there being one less person, the limited space must have felt even more constrained. My former mother-in-law began looking for new living arrangements, but their age presented hurdles in passing rental screenings. Eventually, my ex-husband found a smaller, single-family home for them. Although it was a downgrade in size and likely came with higher rent compared to the apartment, it offered them their own space. He took on the responsibility of supporting his parents, facing a challenging road ahead. Initially thrilled by the prospect of moving into the large house left by my father, my former mother-in-law had to settle for a considerably smaller and different reality, which must have been a disappointing turn of events for her. As for me, I started a new chapter in the house that my parents left behind. It feels warm, almost as if my parents are still with me, preserving their legacy and the memories we shared. This new beginning marks a time of healing and reflection, a chance to honor my parents' memory in the peace of their beloved home.